The nightmare begins with a cruel twist of fate. Kristen, just 15 years old, had been pulled from the grip of a trafficker, a moment that should have marked the end of her torment. For a brief time, her family believed she was safe, that the nightmare was over. Yet within weeks, the unthinkable happened. She vanished once more. The rescue that should have been her salvation became only a haunting prelude. An empty bedroom, her academy uniform still folded neatly on a chair, stands as a silent reminder of promises broken and a future stolen. On January 2nd, 2020, in Spring, Texas, Kristen disappeared again, swallowed by the shadows she had just escaped. She came home once, then the nightmare returned. And so the story begins.
Spring, Texas, a place that seems designed for safety. Subdivisions stretch out in quiet grids, each house framed by trimmed lawns and driveways filled with family cars. Mornings begin with the rush of carpools and the sound of marching cadences from high school ROTC drills. It's a community where neighbors wave from across the street, where children ride bikes until dusk, where the outside world feels far away. For families here, danger has always been something that happens somewhere else. But just beyond this bubble of suburban comfort lies a different reality. Drive 40 minutes southeast, and the landscape shifts. The streets along Houston's Bissonnette corridor tell another story entirely. Neon signs blink into the night, their glow cutting across motels and gas stations. Cars pull in and out with practiced discretion, brief exchanges taking place under the cover of darkness. Online ads are posted from these very blocks, creating an invisible pipeline of exploitation. Here, predators operate in plain sight, feeding off vulnerability and vanishing before anyone can intervene. The contrast is jarring. A teenager in uniform practicing drills under a Texas sun, while only a few miles away, another girl her age is being sold through a screen. This is the fragile border Kristen's life straddled. One foot in a world of order and promise, the other near the shadows that prey on innocence. And when those two worlds collide, safety itself begins to feel like an illusion.
Kristen was, in so many ways, the picture of an ordinary teenager with extraordinary determination. At 15, she stood 5'6", carrying herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had begun to carve out her place in the world. She was a strong student, balancing assignments with the steady discipline demanded of her by junior ROTC. On the drill team, her steps were sharp and deliberate, each movement a reflection of the structure she was learning to embrace. At home, the portrait softens. A messy locker at school, notebooks stacked unevenly on her desk, the half-finished pages of homework left waiting. These are the quiet signatures of a girl still growing, still finding her rhythm between childhood and the first glimpses of adulthood. Her family was her anchor, and even in moments of teenage independence, the ties that bound her to them ran deep. A small heart tattoo etched on her ankle hinted at the restless spirit beneath her discipline, a teenager symbol of individuality, of wanting to be seen in her own right. Friends described her as loyal, someone you could lean on, someone who laughed easily. Beneath the uniform and the structure, Kristen was simply a young girl with dreams, a girl looking toward the future with a sense of possibility. But it is the normalcy that cuts deepest now. A school yearbook photo, her hair neatly done, her smile captured mid-laughter. It could be any 15-year-old's face staring back. And that is what makes her story so devastating. Kristen had goals. She had promise. She had a life unfolding before her. That life would soon intersect with forces no child should ever have to face.
January 2nd, 2020 began like so many ordinary days inside her grandmother's home in Spring, Texas. A familiar space filled with routines and comforts that made Kristen feel secure. The small details of the morning still linger. An empty seat at the table where she should have been, a pair of shoes resting quietly near the door, a half-finished rhythm of a day that would never be completed. Family members moved in and out of the rooms, the ordinary sounds of a household carrying on, until the quiet absence became too sharp to ignore. At first, it seemed like she had simply stepped outside, maybe just a walk, maybe just a moment of space. But time passed. Minutes stretched, and the silence deepened into worry. Kristen wasn't answering. She wasn't coming back inside. She had vanished from the place that was meant to protect her. The last traces of her are fragments, her belongings left behind, the final text message she sent, small imprints of presence that gave no warning of an ending. One moment she was there, surrounded by family. The next, the house was missing her, as if the air had shifted and swallowed her whole. From that day forward, the ordinary walls of her grandmother's home would never feel the same. They became the backdrop of a mystery that still holds her family captive. And with her sudden absence, the search for answers began.
The story of Kristen's disappearance cannot be told without first confronting the horror she had already endured. At 15, she believed she had found a boyfriend in Arion Jackson, a Houston rapper who called himself Young Corleone. What she didn't know was that behind the image and bravado was a predator. Jackson controlled a trafficking ring that pulled in young women and girls, forcing them into an existence of quotas and punishment. In a house off Bissonnet Street, the heart of Houston's trafficking corridor, Kristen joined a group of victims living under constant threat. They were ordered to earn $1,000 a day. Violence and drugs enforced obedience. Beatings and intimidation made escape seem impossible. The youngest among them was just 14. For nearly 11 days, Kristen lived this nightmare, until a rare intervention brought her home. Police rescued her from Jackson's grip and returned her to her parents in spring. For her family, relief clashed with the raw truth of what she had endured. She carried visible trauma, spoke of threats against her family, and woke from nights filled with terror. Home was supposed to be safe. Recovery was supposed to begin. But safety was fleeting. Just 2.5 weeks later, on January 2nd, 2020, Kristen vanished again. This time from the most trusted of places, her grandmother's home. There was no dramatic scene, no loud confrontation. One moment she was there, the next she was gone. And as hours turned to days, investigators began to fear the unthinkable, that Kristen had been pulled back into the very world she had just escaped. Her disappearance so soon after her rescue raises the haunting question that has never been answered. How does a girl rescued from trafficking disappear once more before she's even had the chance to heal? The urgency of that question would drive everything that followed.
From the very moment Kristen was reported missing on January 2nd, 2020, the urgency of her case was clear. Local police opened an investigation, and soon the FBI and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children became involved. Her photo, 15 years old, hazel eyes, blonde hair, was distributed on posters across social media and in official alerts. Families in Spring, in Houston, and beyond were asked to look closely at her face, to remember her features, to keep watch. Tips began to filter in, each one a glimmer of hope and yet another test of patience. Some came from those who thought they saw her in Houston's Bissonnette corridor, the very stretch of road where she had once been forced into trafficking. Others swore they recognized her in images circulating online, advertisements buried on websites that sold human beings with a few keystrokes. In March of 2021, more than a year after her disappearance, a chilling lead emerged. A prostitution ad in the Atlanta area that appeared to show Kristen. It suggested that she might have been moved across state lines, swallowed up in an industry that thrives in the shadows and erases traces as quickly as they appear. But tracking those digital breadcrumbs was like chasing smoke. Ads vanished overnight, then reappeared under new names, new phone numbers, new images blurred by filters or cropped to hide details. Investigators faced the brutal truth of this underground world. Burner phones left no lasting records. Payments were moved in cash or through anonymous transfers. Locations shifted from hotels to apartments to city after city, faster than law enforcement could follow. Each lead seemed to open a door, only for that door to slam shut before answers could be found. The deeper they looked, the more the trail dissolved into a system built on invisibility. For Kristen's family, every false start, every dead end, only sharpened the unbearable question: how can a girl be hidden in plain sight and still remain out of reach? That question weighed heavily as the search stretched on, pushing investigators and her loved ones to confront the reality of a case that was slipping into silence.
The disappearance of Kristen was not just a private tragedy. It became a wound carried by an entire community. At the center of it all was her mother, Robin, whose life transformed overnight from that of a parent into that of a tireless advocate. While investigators searched for leads, Robin built an unrelenting campaign of visibility. Her daughter's face on posters, stapled to lampposts, shared across social media, repeated in interviews with local news outlets. Her voice cracked under the weight of grief, yet she refused to let the silence swallow Kristen's name. Vigils became a rhythm of survival, gatherings where candles flickered in the night, and strangers stood shoulder to shoulder with family, whispering prayers and demanding justice. Each anniversary brought both renewed attention and unbearable pain, reminders of birthdays uncelebrated, milestones lost forever to time. The family marked these days with solemn ceremonies, refusing to let Kristen fade into the long list of the missing. The city responded too. Officials issued proclamations declaring awareness days and holding events in Kristen's name. What began as one family's fight grew into a wider call to confront the dark reality of trafficking that had long gone unspoken. Local organizations, churches, and neighbors amplified the family's efforts, transforming their grief into a public reckoning. But behind the public strength lay private anguish. Robin carried the crushing weight of trauma, her memories shadowed by fear and longing. Other family members spoke of sleepless nights, of dreams shattered by flashbacks, of the relentless question that replayed in their minds: where was she? The emotional toll etched itself into their faces, but still they pressed forward, determined to keep her story alive. Through it all, Kristen's name spread farther, her story pulling awareness into places where the danger of trafficking had once been ignored. Her family's refusal to give up ensured that silence would never win. And as the candles burned low at yet another vigil, the community's grief deepened into something else, a growing determination that Kristen's fight was not just hers alone. It was theirs too, and it was far from over.
The years after Kristen's disappearance carried a heavy stillness, broken only by fleeting sparks of hope. Days blurred into months and months into years, yet her name refused to vanish. Social media kept her image alive, shared by strangers and advocates who had never met her but felt the weight of her story. Online, new threads appeared with each anniversary, tips whispered into comment sections, theories debated by people desperate to believe she could still be found. Age-progressed images released by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children offered haunting glimpses of what she might look like today, her childlike features reshaped into those of a young woman, smiling in a picture that was not truly hers. These images carried both promise and sorrow, keeping the case visible while underscoring the painful truth of time passing without answers. Inside her family's home, the silence was louder. Kristen's room remained waiting, a space preserved in defiance of absence. Posters curled on telephone poles, flyers yellowed in windows, yet Robin's determination never wavered. Hope and despair became two sides of the same coin, one day believing that the next phone call could be the breakthrough, the next sinking into the paralyzing thought that too much time had passed. The investigation stayed open, but leads arrived like faint echoes, an unverified sighting, an online post that vanished before it could be traced, a rumor that dissolved under scrutiny. Each fragment fed the cycle, hope rising, hope collapsing. Still, Kristen's face continued to circulate, a reminder that she was not forgotten, not erased by the silence of passing years. Through all this, the case lingered in the fragile space between possibility and grief, kept alive by a mother's love and a community's refusal to let her memory fade. And as time moved forward, the unanswered question only grew sharper, pressing investigators and family alike toward the uncertain horizon that lay ahead.
In December of 2022, after years of whispers, arrests, and mounting evidence, one of the names tied to Kristen's nightmare finally faced the weight of justice. Ariane Dupree Jackson, known by his street moniker Young Corleone, stood in a federal courtroom and entered a guilty plea to sex trafficking charges. His conviction was more than a personal downfall. It was a window into the machinery of exploitation that had swallowed dozens of girls, Kristen among them. Court documents painted the stark reality of his operation. Victims were recruited and controlled with precision. They were forced to meet daily quotas, threatened with violence if they failed, and conditioned to believe there was no escape. For some, drugs became both a leash and a punishment. For others, fists and intimidation kept them bound. The house near Bissonnette Street in Houston had been more than a residence. It was a trap, where fear was currency and human lives were reduced to profit margins. In February 2023, Jackson was sentenced to a lengthy federal term. Reports place it at 27 years. The courtroom heard how his network stretched across state lines, feeding an underground trade that shifted constantly to avoid detection. Even behind bars, allegations surfaced that phones were smuggled in, allowing the trafficking to continue through coded calls and digital footprints, as if prison walls were not enough to sever his reach. For prosecutors, the sentencing was a victory, a moment of accountability in a war that oftentimes leaves families without any. It dismantled one predator's empire, cutting off at least one artery of a network that thrived in the shadows. For Kristen's family, though, the breakthrough was bittersweet. They had long begged for justice, and here was proof that law enforcement had taken down a man responsible for unspeakable harm. Yet the gavel's strike did not answer the question that haunted every vigil, every sleepless night, every folded flyer. Where is Kristen? The conviction marked progress, but not closure. It was a step forward on a road still lined with grief and uncertainty. And as one door closed in a federal courtroom, another door opened, leading back to the family's unanswered search.
Ariane Dupree Jackson, who styled himself as Young Corleone, projected the image of an up-and-coming rapper chasing success on Houston streets. But behind the music videos and bravado was a far darker reality. He was not simply an artist trying to make a name. He was the architect of a trafficking network that preyed on the vulnerable and treated their lives as disposable. Prosecutors revealed that his operation was highly organized. Dozens of victims, many of them minors, were funneled through his control. Online ads offered their images to buyers across multiple states, cycling quickly from one platform to another to stay ahead of investigators. Every girl had a quota to meet. If she fell short, punishment followed. Beatings, threats, and drug dependency were used like tools in a trade he never intended them to escape. His personal history surfaced in court. A childhood steeped in instability, a young man claiming he never had a fair chance, and a family background prosecutors argued shaped his choices. When a moment of reckoning came, Jackson asked for leniency, portraying himself as someone failed by circumstance. Yet the evidence told a different story, of calculated grooming, of associates who helped enforce rules, of family members whose names appeared in indictments connected to the wider ring. Investigators tied him directly to Kristen's first disappearance. He was the man she thought was a boyfriend, the one who lured her into a house of control on Houston's Bissonnette corridor. The persona of a charismatic rapper masked the predator beneath. His case file became a study in how charm, power, and intimidation are weaponized to keep young victims silent. This was not random. It was methodical, targeted, and built to last. And for Kristen's family, his profile was more than a dossier. It was a reminder of the man who stole her from the safety of home and introduced her to a nightmare. But even with Jackson behind bars, the shadows of his influence remain, leaving investigators to question how far the ring reached and who else still walks free.
The courtroom delivered a verdict that many had long waited for. Arian Dupree Jackson, the man whose empire of exploitation had trapped Kristen and so many others, was finally forced to answer for his crimes. Federal prosecutors laid out the full scope of his operation: dozens of young victims, a system built on fear, quotas, and violence. In 2023, the judge handed down a sentence that would stretch nearly 3 decades, a punishment that marked him as one of the most notorious traffickers in Houston's history. On paper, it was a victory. The justice system had worked, dismantling a predator's network and sending him away for years that he could no longer spend hunting the vulnerable. For advocates and law enforcement, the conviction was proof that persistence mattered, that even the most elusive traffickers could be brought down. But for Kristen's family, the triumph was hollow. Because while Jackson would spend much of his life behind bars, Kristen herself was still gone. Her name remained on missing person posters, her face on age-progressed images, her mother still searching for a daughter who never came home. The sentence did not bring her back. It did not silence the questions that haunted every night. Where is she? What happened after that day? And could she still be out there? The law had delivered punishment to the trafficker, but the wound at the center of this case remained open. Justice was served in part, but the resolution the family longed for, the one that mattered most, had yet to be found. And that absence, more than any prison sentence, is what still lingers.
Years have passed, and still Kristen is not home. Her name remains active in the national database of missing children, her image updated through age progression to show the face she might wear today. Posters continue to circulate, shared across social media, and posted in communities hundreds of miles from where she vanished. Each one carries the same plea: someone, somewhere, knows something. The investigation remains open, but the answers are elusive. Reports of a young woman resembling Kristen surfaced in Houston's Bissonnette corridor. Others suggested sightings as far as Atlanta. But tips in trafficking cases fade as quickly as they appear. Victims moved between cities, hidden behind burner phones and advertised under shifting identities. Without firm evidence, every lead becomes another fragment in a puzzle that refuses to lock into place. For her family, life has been divided into two timelines, before January 2020 and after. They have lived through birthdays without candles, holidays with one seat left painfully empty, anniversaries that mark not milestones but absences. Yet through vigils, proclamations, and endless searching, they refuse to let Kristen's name fall silent. Their hope battles against despair, but it endures, because to let go of hope would mean surrendering her to the darkness. And so the questions remain. Is she still in Houston, hidden in plain sight? Was she moved across state lines, lost in the vast machinery of trafficking that crosses cities and borders with ease? Could she still be waiting to be found, as she was once before? She was rescued once, she was brought back once, which leaves us with the question that haunts every moment of this case. Where is Kristen now?
Kristen's story did not end with her disappearance. It forced a community and a nation to confront the cracks in a system meant to protect its most vulnerable. When she was first pulled from the trafficking ring, her family thought safety had finally been restored. But almost immediately they ran into a wall that too many survivors and their loved ones know too well: the absence of accessible, specialized care. The kind of treatment that could have helped Kristen heal was out of reach, too expensive, too limited, too far away. Her parents tried to piece together what they could, but the support simply wasn't there. Her case has since become a sobering example of what happens when recovery ends at rescue. Advocates point to her disappearance as evidence that rescue alone is not enough. That without funded programs, secure housing, long-term therapy, and relocation options, survivors remain at risk of being pulled back into the same darkness they escaped. Policymakers, activists, and community leaders have used Kristen's name in calls for change, demanding tighter monitoring of online sex ads, stronger interstate cooperation, and resources that don't vanish the moment a victim steps outside a police station. And yet while the debates continue, Kristen's family lives the reality. Her mother still prints flyers, still speaks at events, still clings to the hope that someone, somewhere, might see her daughter and call. Every poster she tapes to a light pole, every number she repeats on the evening news is both an act of love and a reminder of the work that remains undone. Because behind the statistics and policy arguments is a simple truth. One child is still missing. And until she is found, the legacy of this case is not just about gaps in the system. It is about the determination of a mother who refuses to let her daughter's name be forgotten. And so the story ends where it began, with a call to act. If you know anything, no matter how small, reach out. Call the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Call local authorities. Someone, somewhere, holds the piece of truth that could bring Kristen home.